what's his name? Anyway, but yeah. So yes, I understand.
All
So
right,
then,
I forgot to. Good morning, YouTube. Not my priority, but hi. I apologize for.
no, it's always all our. We get everywhere. Everybody's there. You got them over there.
Yeah. I got him. I got him now.
All right, very good, very
Yeah.
good, very good.
Mine was like, you're not live in YouTube. Okay.
A man of mine. Thank you, brother. For
Yes.
God's sake, as the shot I used to say, give more power to the people. Thank you, my man. So go ahead. So
No,
you said you were in conversation with him.
I was in conversation with him, but in delving into the book and the importance of, because there's some books I'm like, I don't feel like I need to read, but now I'm like, I need to read just about everything, and I feel like you rubbed off on me, and it's severely contagious, and I appreciate it. So thank you.
Oh
But
well,
what
maybe a reminder because you have lived your whole life in words.
I
Long before
have, I have, but it's been mostly transactional. Not the reading part, the writing part, mostly transactional.
I
But
understand.
as I'm in his book, I'm realizing, the grid that we live in called, property land, was developed in somebody else's country or countries, and they've had several conferences where they've divvied up a land they never even step foot on, sent emissaries, Ponce de Leon and Columbus and all these other folk, and kept secret maps. And I was thinking about cartography and where are the African cartographers? I know the ancient Kemetic people had maps because they sailed the ocean blue. And like, I was just thinking about the wildness of us fighting with each other when there's really a very, very small handful of people with satellites everywhere. When they talk about, heavenly beings falling from the sky, it's going to be Elon Musk's satellites, not airplanes, or maybe spaceships. It's probably going to be his satellites because he's, I'm going to say less, but it's those.
No. That's very important to understand that motivation, as you just alluded to. I have a student now. Shout out to Brother Darrell, who's lived several lives. He's a student at Howard Law School, third-year law student, and just a brilliant brother. He's lived several lives, including one as an engineer. And he was walking folk through Musk's agenda, everything. The idea that he's going to colonize Mars, that in his mind, y'all can have this. I'm going, and he wore that funky Occupy Mars t-shirt when he was out there with Trump running around with his stomach showing. It's very obvious.
You do know he's trying to form an X when he jumps up in the air.
Yeah. Oh yeah. All of it is, this is a man. He's not Tony Stark. He's not smart. He just got a lot of money. So, but he was walking, us all through, everything that he is trying is designed with that in mind. So those satellites, you need the linkages, communications network, the precious minerals, of course. Tesla's not a car company. Cybertruck, the boring company, because if there's any water underneath the course of Mars, so he got that to everything he's doing. X, the whole idea of communicating simultaneously to everyone. Let me play around with this. It's all not designed with anything terrestrial. So yeah, satellites, and the idea of the law, not only of the sea, but of space. In fact, he's getting ready to publish an article. He just finished a draft. I think it's going to the Howard Law Journal. He's on the journal board. And the article talks about the law of the sea, that those places on the globe that are beyond, quote unquote, national governance formations, and how that proxy, they deep enough into the sea, all these minerals are there, but it's going to kill the ecosystem. You're gonna go down there and dredge this up, and then all the fish gonna die. But Musk's thing is, I don't care. I'm practicing. Why? Because there are minerals on asteroids and minerals on Mars. I'm not thinking about y'all. I don't give a damn about y'all. So your point, I think, is one that, as you're making it, as you often do, kind of dropping that breadcrumb. I just, wanted to acknowledge that, and for folks who may not be thinking this way, that while people have wrapped up in flags and polls and what TV show they're on or which team they're cheering for, the people who are going to have the greatest impact on us, that's all bread and circuses. They're not thinking about that. And so you can't backmap what they're doing in front of us to what you are concerned about, because what you're concerned about has been cultivated. That taste has been cultivated as a distraction to what the people who are going to have the most control over your life are thinking. So I didn't want you to pass it too quickly because you're making that point. But please.
And thank you. As Soon Shing, I didn't even know he owned. As soon as I saw the Los Angeles Times for the first time, they're not endorsing a presidential candidate, I immediately said, who owns the paper? Like I immediately, while I was on the air, and I said, oh, Okay.
Oh
And
yeah.
the editorial board resigned. You know, I used to be on the editorial board at the New York Daily News, so I know how those things run. They had already written the endorsement for Kamala Harris and talked about this being the most important election and why. And for him to say, yeah, and then lie and say, you know, they couldn't come to a consensus. No, they came to a consensus. The lady resigned, told on you,
Yeah, sure
but
did.
you have the
Shout out to
power.
Muriel Garza, because you always say journalism is dead, but there were some journalists who
Yeah.
showed up
Oh,
this week.
and you know, I learned the hard way that an editorial page is only as good as its owner, right? You know, as I was fighting for Amadou Diallo's humanity at the Daily News, I was slapped in the face with, this is not our paper. This is Mort Zuckerman's opinion.
Wow.
This is his opinion. You know,
Wow.
I got to follow what he says, you know. And I was like, for the first time in my young life, I realized where the power resided, because I was idealistically thinking that we had control over these words on this page. And it changed my whole perspective on how to move in the world, right? Because either you're going to capitulate to power and serve power and kneel to power, or you're going to become power and lead the way to fight against these folk. And they have way more money, but they don't have the numbers. And as far as I know, there's strength in numbers. So y'all, as I was talking with Wright, my brother Wright, and he's my brother now, yesterday, you know, we're the tribe. We're the same tribe. You know, we get caught up in skin tone and religion and where we come from on these made up grid lines drawn by other people with not us in mind. We're busy fighting over foundational existence versus this or that, while they understand the big picture. None of us matter, and we're pieces on their chessboard, you know.
None of
So
us matter.
it's time for us to play a Wari, you know, like let's play a
Right.
different game.
That's right. Remind us that I mean, you've done it before, but again, I mean, we know as teachers, repetition is essential to, you know, sometimes people listen and sometimes they have to listen and think and then speak after processing something they may have heard 15 times, but like a flash of lightning at night, you go, oh, and then you see everything else. Oh, I saw that before, but now I can see this other stuff. You know, I've heard a lot of conversation, including some we had this week on Urban View Morning, that the people don't understand. That's not understands what I mean. People don't recognize, or maybe are not aware of is it a metaphorical firewall between an editorial page of a newspaper and the news division? You said it before, but how does that, because somebody's watching right now saying, I don't understand the paper.
Okay. I didn't understand either. I was, you know, I started my career as a sports writer, which also Wright Thompson he works for ESPN, which was another interesting. I'm like, why is this sports guy writing about this stuff? I need to know. but what I also know is sports is built-in drama. So some of the best writers come out of sports, writers, like real writers, because you have to, you know, create the drama's there in sports, but now you have to create the narrative and it's, you know, some beautiful prose. But anyway, you know, moving from sports to news, to covering news, to business, and then being asked to sit on the editorial board, which I had no idea. I just thought these were little boring pieces. And I was like, I don't want to write this stuff, right? But I learned quickly, you know, that's where the power resides. It is the opinion of the owner of the paper. And that person, and so it always, why did Robert Maxwell buy the Daily News, this shipping magnate? Why did Mort Zuckerman, the Canadian real estate person, buy that in U.S. News and World Report? Why is Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post? Why did this Chinese immigrant from South Africa buy the Los Angeles Times? Well, because you get to shape opinion. Right. And that's where you do your endorsement. So every political candidate comes in, they sit with the editorial board. We fight it out. But then ultimately, the person, the owner says, this is who we're going to endorse, you know, and somebody gets assigned to write it. And if I don't agree with it, I won't get assigned to write. I never had to write anything I didn't agree with. So I didn't write a whole lot of stuff. But so I covered education, child welfare, things that I really did care about. But yeah, that's where the power is at a newspaper, the editorial page. And it's where they are purposefully shaping the opinion, you know, and especially a paper like the Los Angeles Times, which looks like a liberal, you know, leaning newspaper. For this to happen is kind of wild. So a non-endorsement is an endorsement. Let's be clear, you know.
And what impact do you think that which would have been more influential, an endorsement as the ones that were written at the Los Angeles Times and the Washington Post for Kamala Harris for president, or the owners of the paper standing against their employees, and which would have, if any, more impact in the current election cycle, particularly given the fact that people don't.
I was going to say, it matters not. No one's reading and no one trusts. Y'all ain't trust newspapers. You know, nobody's reading the newspaper to get their marching orders. It's not the 1950s, 60s, 40s, 30s. You know, this is not now where we get most of our news from TikTok. So,
unfortunately, well, a lot of people do. If
right.
I start getting my news from TikTok, please in my physical existence, because it's not me. My body has been snatched.
Yes.
Please, that's not me. It may look like me, but if I ever say, TikTok, I was reading TikTok and go, okay, he's done. What did you do with him? Because that's not him.
And all I was also going to say is what they've also signaled to Trump or the Project 2025 people or Peter Thiel is that we're going to fall in line. We're going to use these apparati to do your bidding. Or at
least we don't want to incur your wrath, and if you do win this election. I mean,
correct.
It's very interesting.
They're hedging their bets.
Yeah, they are hedging their bets, which to me is, I'm glad they took the stance they took. Glad they took the stance they took, because that has more influence than the endorsements.
Let me pop back in. Somebody asks, who's the audience of the Washington Post and the New York Times? That's a good question. I have no idea. I think
we're both. The two of us are the audience. I think people who read, and people who are in a class in any government, or not government, in any country, the reading class who still reads quote unquote legacy media, print, news. A lot of digital subscriptions were canceled yesterday, but those people are decision makers. Influencers, not watch my cat or watch me unbox trading cards or watch if I can get all this food in my mouth in one shove influencers, but on Capitol Hill, how can I get 15 more cents? And I really don't give a damn whether you have healthcare influencers. They are in that class, which means probably not many people.
Right, but the larger question is who's getting their marching orders? Who's saying, the Los Angeles Times is, wrote this amazing editorial endorsing Kamala Harris. I was on the fence, and because of this editorial, I will now be voting for her. Or, the Washington Post just laid out all of the facts for us, and this makes so much sense. I was leaning this way, but now I am influenced by the Washington Post editorial to do this. I feel like it's not that election.
No, but no, not at all. But no, but and not but. And how do you read what I would imagine is and think is another level between those papers and the people who say, oh, I was leaning one way or another way in terms of narrative. So, for example, every morning, I remember when Roland was on TV1 after he and I had the fight that ended up in our relationship. He invited me to come down there one day, and then he just kept inviting me. So week after week, I would come. And then he started his own thing, obviously, and I still go. But, we were in the C-SPAN building, downtown D.C. That's where his studio was. He was sharing studio space with MSNBC. So I would see Mika, and all them, Bob Woodward sitting in the green room. We sitting there talking with them, whatever. And they would have a stack of newspapers, the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and usually Financial Times, which is why it was very interesting, because many of these white people, they would see me reading the FT, which is, of course, orange. And they'd be like, oh, so what's going on? Like, we don't see nobody else in here reading the Financial Times, even the white people. But I know what that paper is. So, and it's a Negro. It's almost like, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, look, a Negro, as Du Bois and France would always say. Anyway, and then you go on set, and when you turn on Morning Joe or anything, they got the newspapers on their desk. Now, invariably, I carry a newspaper everywhere I go. So, even when we're on the radio, somebody had said, that newspaper shuffling is distracting. The mom said, well, you just going to hear that because he's going to read the newspaper. Yeah, exactly, I am. Even the people that's serious, the guy who's one of the engineers that run the whole project, you know, I'm there, it's 5:30, 6 o'clock, I'm reading the paper. He comes through and says, man, I thought I was the last person reading the physical newspaper. I said, I'm too old to go to digital, brother, for everything. And we just started laughing. When that's how we start our relationship. Anyway, I saw that as a backdrop to this. No, people are not going to change their mind based on the newspaper, but the people who you watch and the stories that you hear now, too close to call, pose, that's being shaped here. Those people are then catching the signal. This is what we need to do. Then they get on television, and then you say, I was looking at TikTok, and there was a 30-second thing where Abby Phillip was sitting on stage and Van Jones was arguing with Scott. And they read the newspaper. They get the message, they send it to you, and then you start thinking, and then they drop Charlemagne in, who I'm not convinced has ever read a newspaper in his life. And you start to think, and then he gets frustrated, and him and Gloria Vanderbilt's son start arguing, and you think that argument is because they woke up, took a shower, ate, came to the studio and start arguing. No, this is the thing that pours into the head of the narratives. You know what I'm saying? Y'all was shaping opinion at the newspaper, but the opinion people who brought it. So how do you place the intermediary between the people and these people and the people who own these people?
What I'm saying is the world is different. And I've actually asked my audience to put it all down. Stop watching, stop reading. This is all manufactured in a way that is damaging to our future. You know what to do. Like, yeah, I don't.
And do what? Listen
to Urban View. Like,
right. So don't put it down. Just listen to this one instead of that one.
Yeah. I mean, but I don't feel like what we do on Urban View is that, right?
But it is, right?
We're talking to the people we have access to folk all over the country at one time who are engaged because they pay for radio in a way that most people are not, who are in them streets, poll working, teachers, truck drivers who have traversed this country. They are banging up against all kinds of folk. And I feel like journalistically, we get more information, more feedback that's legitimate, not something based on some poll that somebody told you this is up, this is down. We're going to bring in key people, maybe, the Lickman with the keys. We're going to talk with Rachel Bittercoffer. We're going to talk with lobbyists to see where they're pushing folk, right? And we're going to have deep conversations about not these flybys, about what we need to have happen. And our focus is on creating the agenda. And then whoever's in office, provided we can protest them, provided we can reach out to them and bang on them, we all have levers to get in, right? Because we got L. Joy and NAACP, we got Larry working, Center for Law and Social Justice. You are there, centered there. I got a Rolodex that I don't flex at all, but they're people I could call any point in time. But they're and that's important, right? That as a journalist, I didn't have access the way I have access now to people. And what I've also learned, I mean, I sat with Ross Baraka on Monday. Yes. And, we're having this conversation. I'm like, he wants to be governor of New Jersey. And I'm saying, okay, what has the most impact on you in terms of moving the needle? And he talked about going to a block association meeting. And this lady got up and she was near tears because her neighborhood was in shambles. And he said, yeah, you could write, you can email. And there are people that, talk a lot. We tend to ignore them because they're just talking and they're saying the same thing and they never do anything. But when you show up to a meeting, when you show up to a city council meeting or board meeting, and I see the passion, he said, so he got up at 9 o'clock the next day, went to her neighborhood and fixed most of the things that she asked for. Right. And that to me is the relationship. He said, yeah, we're servants. Well, and we have changed, to me, and even listening to corporate media, they have an agenda. Their agenda is to make money. Their agenda, not that
we have an agenda.
Urban View doesn't have an agenda, but damn, we aren't driven by the same thing because we don't have Nielsen's ratings. So we're not pushing, anything. While advertising is important and we have to make money, pay the bills, pay the people, it's a different game. And so I feel very confident in that. And I'm not just saying y'all come to Urban View. I'm saying I've been there for 10 years and I see the impact. And
everything you said makes perfect sense, and I agree with it.
Now you're there, so
I'm glad. Listen, I'm grateful. Like I said, I would do that every day. I mean, just being in conversation. I think you're right. I mean, between things that happen and everyone in the world stands the mediating forces, and that's all I was saying. That everything has a filter, in a society where you can't be in contact with everything all the time. And listening to you and Mayor Baraka, and as you reiterated later this week, it's the people who show up. It's not the people who talking. And so that lady showed up, and I got to go deal with this, and I want to go deal with it, and I can't be everywhere at once. But not only the people who are in my face, but the people who I am clear are not going away until I do what I said I was going to do. And this is literally all I was saying is that is a function. I mean, thinking about it in terms of even our African States framework, we talk about the science and technology category. The science and technology has changed so that people can reach a whole lot of people. So yes, the vice president was in Texas yesterday, and Beyonce is standing there reaching all these people. Yes, between this call her daddy, is it, and all the smoke, perhaps between a fifth and a quarter of the electorate reached. But okay, and then of course Donald Trump dissembling, incoherent, clearly unwell, talking with Joe Rogan. All these incels and others who you want to inspire to vote or galvanize to vote, many of them are listening to Joe Rogan. I mean, but there's media, and then there's us.
All right, I'm gonna say this and I'm gonna leave. When you ask this question, I'm very clear that we don't have a media, a real media that and we do. We have people like
I was gonna ask what you
like the woman who but if your owner of your newspaper can shut down you gave this person the right to be the editorial page editor and to endorse and write the endorsement. They wrote the endorsement and it didn't go the way you wanted, so you said we're not running an endorsement.
Yeah, that means you never had the right.
Correct. So I'm saying, and the only way to change that is for us, because most of us don't read newspapers. So they're driven by something different. They don't need your little $1, $2. I don't even know what a newspaper costs anymore because I'm digital. But they don't need your money, right? Because they're billionaires who have bought the paper to influence you.
Yeah.
So the relationship is different, is the point. There used to be a time when an owner would buy a paper, and even though they would push, they were still at the whim of the people. And I'm saying, even politically, this game is, I'm not going to say it's rigged, but it requires something of us, which is why we have to show up in numbers that we haven't shown up before to shift the power back into the hands of the people so that we can demand better media. We can demand certain things, even on television. Corporate, CNN is following the bouncing ball. We're the bouncing ball. Let's bounce. Let's dance. Let's fight. Let's do the things, right? And what Ross was saying is, when you show up, I have to do something. So we have to show up. And that has to be the message until we can get this ship corrected, right? Because it's not. It's upside down, topsy-turvy. This thing, I'm sitting there every day, like, frustrated. To your point, the fact that Kamala Harris has to go everywhere, everywhere, and sit with everybody. And it's been brilliant because when she sat with Leonard, he has a different view now than because he was talking real greasy and ignorantly, to the point where that man used you as a damn ad that's been running in Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia on loop because you said something out of your mouth real recklessly.
Yeah.
And now you mad, you doing a cease and desist. He don't give a damn about. He already got what he needed from you.
Got what he needed, son. And I say son
Anyway.
here very advisedly. He got what he needed, son. You are a pawn in a much larger game. You're not a rook. You're not a knight. You're not a queen or a king. You, sir, are a pawn.
Not even a pawn. I think he's a square.
A square.
I'm not saying. I think he's one of the squares because a pawn could become a queen.
That's true. That's
if moving correctly. You
that's
ain't
very
even that,
true.
right?
That's very true. And it's
we need to
sad.
play a different game. Let's play a Wari.
Yeah, you're right. That's very well. And therein lies the lesson. How do you walk away? We are surrounded by it. We are surrounded by it. And we're not going to walk away because, as Fred Moten, the poet, critic, writer, cultural meaning maker, once wrote, I'm looking over my shoulder, a lot of the Motens I have right there. And maybe it's in, is it in B. Jenkins or Field Trio, where he wrote, maybe the Service Porch. He writes, he's got a poem, I ran from it and I was still in it. So there's nowhere to run, nowhere to hide in this. And we're in week 2 of the 3 weeks preceding the federal election here in the United States, for everybody living outside, and for wherever you're living on the globe, something that will influence all of us one way or the other. And we're in week 2 of our conversation that started last week, running for the borders, close to the edge. And next week we'll do the final part before the last day, because today is election day in the United States. And Prof, I really grateful for, and in the larger universe of gratitude, very grateful for the very effective way that you've been narrating over the air, on the airwaves, narrating the 2 things related to voting and election day. One, narrating a running tally of what states were partially, now fully open at polling capacity. Places like Florida, North Carolina, as you kind of tally as folk called in, or even as you set the stage at the beginning of the show, this is where we are, this is how many people have voted. That's number one. And number two of 2, giving a sense of the cumulative effect and the momentum of that early voting. There's no daily tally that I've heard that kind of does that consistently, so that people get a sense of participation. In a minute, we'll talk about the effect. And one of the reasons we are calling today, next Saturday, inshallah, and the last Saturday, number 241 in our ongoing conversations, running for borders close to the edge, is because all of this is being framed by borders. There are the physical, natural borders, the border that separates the ball we call Earth from its atmosphere, the gases that surround it, from everything beyond, which is literally everything except this little blue speck. The borders that constitute the imaginings of human formations beyond your blood kin, people you don't know, and then how do you interact with them, as we've been going through, taking our time. And next Monday, for everybody in the Nubia formation, and for everybody, and the many beyond, Monday night and office hours, I think we'll probably finish the first conceptual category on Monday night, social structure, because now folks have had a week and some change to read over the reading. John Ma's from John Ma's book Polis on ancient Greece and its kind of formations. When we talk about democracy, we should know what we're talking about in terms of origins. Like any word, you want to look up the etymology. And polis, political, politics, democracy. Michael Gomez, the short first chapter of his book African Dominion, folk will have time to read that to do what we want to transition to after we get into governance, which is the next of the 6 conceptual categories, African states categories. How African people thought and think about relationships with each other. A lot of overlap with anybody else in the world, but also some key distinctions that need to be discussed, but we can't discuss them until we're aware of them. And then we're saving Walter Rodney for governance when we get into governance. But the third piece being the grandparent of all of that, the Egyptian, with the chapter that we borrowed from a book on ancient Egypt, the more recent edition, where we talk about, the late Barry Kemp talks about the formations of early African social structures. But I'm saying all that as a backdrop to say that borders, we talked Monday night in Nubia about the fact that there is no evidence that the ancient Africans, the classical Africans, whether it be Egypt, Nubia, Kush, Axum, had a concept of citizenship. Now, they had clearly distinctions they made between themselves and others, geographically, territorially, but the idea of citizenship was not there. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted us, in terms of our first of our 6 conceptual categories, in Africana studies, and I repeat them because that's what people always remember. And you all know, most people here know the conceptual categories now: social structure, governance, ways of knowing, science and technology, cultural meaning making, and the movement and memory, the 6 categories which form a methodology, a point of departure for a methodology of Africana studies. I will die on the hill if necessary, but I won't die. In fact, I would say that differently. Let me change the language. I will live in the community that understands that if we're going to talk about Africana studies, you have to have some form of norms. You have to have some form of methods. And that framework is a method with language that is easily entered as a point of entry. And then as we complicate it, it remains simple as we think through it in more complicated ways. It's a grounding thing. But in the first of those categories, social structure, it allows us to begin a conversation and sustain a conversation we've been having now for 4.5 years in this expanded space, in this space that we are so, privileged and to have and be in, and responsible for being not only good stewards, but being responsible to those who came before, to everybody who's here, and those who are coming, for maintaining and growing. It gave us a chance to sustain this conversation of borders, because we're in a moment when the mediating forces are trying to continually remind us of something that has always been a fiction, that any line on the map is a natural line. If it's not a river, if it's not a mountain, if it's not a savanna, if it's not a rainforest or a jungle, it's not natural. Those lines are artificial. And so we talk about our country, our country, our country. When that brain-addled, brain-leaking white nationalist fascist, we'll talk a little about fascism in a moment, Trump says our country, he's not talking to you. He's not talking to me. He is reminding his addled, scared followers, disciples, that there is a border, and he is running for the border. He's not running to escape those borders. He's running to construct those borders, because constructing those borders is what allows him to maintain in his tiny world some semblance of self-worth, because his worth from the time he came out of his mother's womb until this very day, 78 years later, his 78 and counting years later, his self-worth is based on his ability to hide from his deepest fears by generating from within and by projecting it onto us without the illusion that he has some control. And that control is absolutely anchored in the illusion that these artificial lines, that these human generated lines that we make real by acting as if they are real, will separate us from them. And so, here we are in the second week, and it is, we said we would do 3 parts, in part because we are now on election day in the United States, something we've been talking about for over a year. And at the beginning of this year, we said most of the world will be participating within those imaginary lines that are made real by enforcement without and within, including our participation in the belief. We are now in a moment when it becomes necessary for us to pay attention. I use the language of capital because that's what we've been trained to do. Pay attention. In other words, focus. In other words, give over to a thing that we have not prioritized the time and space it takes for us to train our minds on the thing. And that thing in this country called United States of America is the federal election. Now, between all of these elements that are operating and all of us are the mediating forces. Prof, as you said, as we just heard Professor Hunter say, you've got newspapers, you've got television, you've got social media. All of these are delivery systems in our African States framework. It would be in the science and technology category. What ways of interacting with each other, facilitated by artificial means, technology, and the thinking that animates that applied science, have human beings created in any moment in time and space to mark our time. The idea that Leonard McKelvey would be a force in being a mediating factor, whether he influences your thinking or not, the idea that he would have been a force 50 years ago, probably not, because there was no electronic media in the same form. There was no cable, certainly no YouTube, no social media. So there wasn't a way for the algorithms, for the owners to mediate and select who they would promote as spectacle to make them unavoidable for those of us who are plugged into that technology, into that matrix. It wouldn't have been. I mean, I don't have any doubt that Brother McKelvey could have been an opinion columnist for the Pittsburgh Courier or the Chicago Defender. I have no doubt he could have been a columnist or a writer for the Tri-State Defender in Memphis or the Washington or Baltimore Afro-American or the Los Angeles Sentinel. I have no doubt. But in this day and age, that's not required because reading and writing isn't required. There's a guest essay by Jonathan Malezic in the New York Times yesterday. There's a very entitled, there's a very good reason college students don't read anymore. And let me see here. It's a very good reason that college students don't read anymore. No, I'm not going to, because it's also now, you know, I have the digital versions of a lot of papers, but I do subscribe to several print papers precisely because I am old enough to have experienced, when there was no other option, the very important tactile function of reading in sequence, as we talked about many times, and going back and forth. And that slows you down. It creates a different type of awareness, a spatial awareness. I mean, there's all kind of scholarship on that and science on that, rather than the endless scrolling. What they now, I guess, one of the phrases they've developed is doom scrolling. I resist that and will resist it to the day I stop breathing, as the only way of having a delivery system of the mediating factor, the mediating forces, because what it does is it removes you from time and space. In other words, you can do that anywhere, just like you can read a physical paper anywhere or a physical book anywhere. But for me, anyway, I know where I was physically in the world, what I was riding in, where I was sitting, where I was walking, when I'm encountering a physical reading act. Whereas if I'm doing this, it could be anywhere. And that, you know, that could be a feeling of mine. But anyway, in this article, there's a very good reason college students don't read anymore. He talks about teaching a class. He's at Southern Methodist University in Texas. And he talked about teaching a class back in 2011, a reading class, general education class, where he assigned 9 books. And he said the students read all the books. And we discussed them. They did the writing. He said, this semester, I find myself assigning no books, a few articles. And they struggle even with that. And he goes through why, the disruption of technology. But it isn't a lament. He ends up the opinion article by saying that next semester he's going to assign not 9 books. He says he's going to assign 1 book, though. And it's his job. And it's up to students whether or not they will resist intellectual inertia. And I'm saying all that as a backdrop to this, as we think about this question of running for the borders and close to the edge, because we're all close to the edge at this point in many ways. Metaphorically, we're close to the edge. We feel our blood pressure going up. Oh my God, what's going to happen? Trump wins, Harris wins, all this stuff. I'm saying it to say it's our responsibility. It's our responsibility to engage in focused thinking now, and to take full advantage while we can of these technologies that we don't own or control either, but to be a mediating force, you know. And I thought about that as we were talking, Prof, and you were laying this, you know, the observation that people don't read newspapers anymore. I certainly don't read them for the opinions. I read newspapers the same way I read most books. And that is for information that I wasn't aware of, perspective that I hadn't thought about. But in the case of newspapers, I read them for the running tally of events and to be in contact with some things that I probably didn't know on a daily basis. But which is why I refer to newspapers and all the mediating forces that really do center them as mass commercial news entertainment media, because it's not the type of thing that anyone should follow. The Washington Post and the New York Times, I think the owners, the last couple of days, Friday, Thursday, did a service to the people who live in the United States of America by not running an endorsement of Kamala Harris, because for many people who haven't touched a newspaper in years, and for many more people who never touched a newspaper, period, there's at least an awareness that these 2 billionaires really don't care who wins a federal election. They want to be in favor with whoever wins. And so now, if they had simply allowed their editorial boards to endorse Kamala Harris for the presidency, that wouldn't even have been a blip. It's okay. Wait, you're not. Damn, they're not. What? And who knows whether it'd be influential? I'll tell you right now, I think it's more influential that they didn't do it than if they did. So thank you, owners of the Post and the Times. But it made me think, Prof, as you were talking of Clyde Taylor's book, The Mask of Art, which one of my favorite books by the new ancestor, Clyde Taylor, who just finished teaching this book in my Africana Aesthetics course at Howard. Again, I will never concede not assigning books. If I've got a class of 200 students, like my intro to Africana Studies class, or a class of 100, like my Africana Aesthetics class, they're going to be assigned books. Whether they read them or not is up to them, and it's up to me as an educator to elicit from them not only a desire but a requirement that they read. And usually that's through assessment, although I reject that in some ways, because it's like trying to hold back the ocean with your fingers. We don't live in that type of framework yet, again. But anyway, I saw that to say that we just finished this text, and the first paragraph of The Mask of Art, which I hadn't intended to bring up, but since we kind of talked a little bit about this first element of what happened this week, the reminder that there is no border between the owner of a media platform and the people who work for that owner. Ultimately, it is, as we just heard Prof. Hunter say, the owner who will determine. So if you want to determine something other than that, you have to stand independently, and that ultimately will be the salvation of the species, when we do not allow those who maintain their own self-worth by thinking they can move people around by convincing us that we don't have alternatives. We have to walk away from that. But in the preface and acknowledgments of this book, Clyde Taylor writes, this book tries to make a contribution to an important but still scattered discussion. It's always going to be scattered because there are people in the world. But this is what he's writing about. He says, the way people, things, and ideas are influenced by the social and political interests mediating their presentation. The politics of representation has become increasingly relevant with the enlarged role played by filtering and reproduction in our diet of intellectual impressions. And there it is. And there it is. In other words, something stands between, to evoke Richard Wright, repurposed and reintroduced to introduced to a new generation of readers and people who heard about it by Ta-Nehisi Coates. There's something that stands between, to quote Richard Wright, mediated now by Ta-Nehisi Coates for a new generation. There's something that stands between the world and me. That's something that stands between the world and me. It's Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's Joe Scarborough. Is Karen Hunter. It's Sirius XM. It's Black Star Network with Roland Martin. It's between the world and me stands that sliver. Is In Class, is Nubia, is Knarrative, is all of the mediating platforms, is X or Twitter, is the Breakfast Club and the Shade Room. Between the world and me, there is a border. And that border is generated by the ability and access to attract numbers of people who will be influenced, hence the term influencer, by that mediating force. So when Clyde Taylor writes that the way people, things, and ideas are influenced by the social and political interests mediating their presentation, the politics of representation, you experience something and then you represent it to everybody else, that has become, he says, increasingly relevant with the enlarged role played by, here it is, filtering. You know how girls on Black Planet be, acting all bubbly. I'm sorry, that's Talib Kweli and Kanye West. Get them hot. Yeah, social media in that moment 20, 25 years ago when he releases that song. Of course, Talib, whose mother is a colleague of Larry Daniels' favor at Mega Everest. Dr. Brenda Green with the Black Writers Conference, who is a comrade of Professor Karen Hunter. In other words, but for Talib's mother's generation, the mediating force was still free broadcast networks and public television, newspapers, not just the New York Times, the New York Post, the Daily News, but the Amsterdam News of Harlem, the City Sun of Brooklyn. When a name like John Oliver Killings or Maya Angelou, and names like Sonia Sanchez, names like Toni Morrison or Toni Cade Bambara did not have to be evoked as tropes for something else, or perhaps at best aspired to convert from some form of writing to a visual experience like a movie or a miniseries on Netflix or YouTube, when there wasn't a option to upload onto a digital platform whatever musings came to our heads, so that the mediating forces would attract eyeballs and therefore build influence to people whose only goal is profit, by saying, because this got this many views, it must now convert into a larger platform so we can make this many more dollars, like, I don't know, Diary of an Awkward Black Girl, which could then turn into something like Insecure, and now apparently a series of movies for someone like Issa Rae, who is very clear ideologically that she is rooting for everybody Black. But you wonder now, in terms of the mediating force, what Clyde Taylor writes about as the role played by, enlarged role played by filtering and reproduction in our diet of intellectual impressions, what happens when the we begins to influence what stands between the world and me in ways that the market, which is the mediating presence that shapes that filter, begins to say, we don't care about content, which they've always said one way or the other. We care about profit. And so no matter how much you might laugh, no matter how much you might find it interesting, or even distracting, or amusing in a way to take you off the troubles of the world. I saw a commercial over the last couple of days. I don't remember where, because again, this thing is now relentless and endless. The quest for silence becomes much more difficult. You turn on something to do something, you see a commercial pop up, and I think it says a new movie out with our sisters Kiki Palmer and SZA that's coming out, that Issa Rae has produced or written, and it's the baby talk for me to evoke my students. It's the baby talk for me that makes that filtering process initially difficult. I had to adjust my ears to the baby talk, and then now I can get to the narrative and the story. But again, that's the filtering, because winners or losers are not being picked by us. Well, they are being picked by us by clicks, likes, and shares, and then the mediating force then says, oh, this will attract some money. Let's let them make this movie. Let's let them make this movie. Let's let them, not realizing that in that loop, finally, as I put this book down, because I intend on talking about this, but it's very important to do that in this moment, because again, this is the second of a third conversation of how we run for the borders and how we're close to the edge. The idea that the consumption of that is being determined by our choices, but our choices are being determined by what stands between the world and me, and what between the world and me is doing increasingly is looking in that lowest common denominator for things that will not only make them profit, but that also have the unintended, unthought about consequence, as Clyde Taylor says, finally, of influencing our, quote, diet of intellectual impressions, our diet of intellectual impressions. But I'm old enough, and thank the ancestors and elders, that I've had enough experience that when I do see something like that, I will watch it. I will enjoy it. I will think about it. It'd be provocative, because I know all the students watched I Clone Tyrone, so I got to watch it. And then to rebalance myself, I will close that and pick up August Wilson, pick up Toni Morrison or Toni Cade Bambara, pick up Du Bois, because I don't ever want my diet to turn exclusively into fast food. That's how you get E. coli. Shout out to McDonald's. So the whole question then of running for the borders, whether you're running as an elected official for an elective office, whether you are literally trying to maintain your sanity, those borders also create not just separation, but the possibility of connection when you cross those borders. But we're close to an edge now. We're close to an edge again in our African States framework, in the social structure that we find ourselves in. What we talked about last week, what we're talking about this week, what we talked about in office hours on Monday night. The edge of those borders reveal their artificiality, and also it also tests our capacity to cross them when we get close to an edge like we are right now. So as I said, it's election day in the United States, and the excellent work of those like the hosts on Sirius Urban View and Professor Hunter, again, eternal gratitude for this, for this platform and ability to be in conversation with folk here, for folks in Knarrative and Nubia and beyond, to be able to deal with this question.
Can I say something regarding
No,
your
please
presence?
come on in.
Your presence on Urban View is important, because as I thought about Joe Madison and the work that he did, again, this is why I make a distinction between what we do in corporate media. Joe Madison was with the NAACP. He was marching. He was registering people. He was working with Dick Gregory. He was informing. He used his platform as an activist tool, right, to get people engaged. And, we can entertain, most people who have platforms in this day and age is about eyeballs, clicks, algorithms, entertainment. But if we couldn't replace Joe Madison, but I wanted to bring as much knowledge and intention to these airwaves. And you, with the law degree, with your 30 plus years of teaching people about themselves, I thought it was important. So we have the levity in Lamont, but we need to have the extraction. You got so much. We get a glimpse of it here in class, which I'm eternally grateful for. But that radio, we're looking at 40 million people potentially that we can reach. This space is, people can choose to come in. But if you have Sirius in your car, you happen upon that and you hear something out of your mouth, it can change the world, right? And so I can't do it. I don't have enough breath by myself, but this to me is how we do it together. It's like all of us have a responsibility to bring our brick. And what you bring in the morning is unmatched. And no, we can't replace Joe Madison, but you bring so much to the table. So I thank you. Yes, while you're grateful to be there, I really know, and after you is Larry, and then there's Clay. And it's just, to me, you cannot have an excuse if you listen to Urban View that you're not informed. And you get to call up.
That's right.
Challenge us, because again, we don't know everything. So there's so many listeners that fill in, like we've had so many poll workers give us some insight into what's happening in these different states, what they're experiencing, how they're navigating different people. It's my life's work. So I'm grateful that you said yes. That's all I want to say.
No, thank you. Yeah, I hear you, and like I said, that gratitude is mutual, and it is your life's work, and you're demonstrating that not just with what you say, but what you do, and that is. I mean, it really is invaluable, especially in a season like this. And yeah, no one can be replaced. We move on. We move through time and space, and we all, that awful day will surely come, as the old gospel song goes. Joe Madison, sitting with Shauna Renee yesterday, at the end of our 3 hours, Lamont and I, of the 3 hours we're there in the studio, in that house, surrounded by all the things that Joe Madison brought in that space with his daughter. It was just a beautiful reminder of our responsibility. And I do take it seriously, as I said to you. I mean, said it before, and I'll say it again. When I come into space, I'm representing everybody who poured into me. And if I don't do that, it's a betrayal of them. It can be difficult at times. And no, we're not activists like Joe Madison was, but that was a different time. Talking yesterday with Congressman Scott, his friend, who was in the leadership in Virginia in the NAACP when Joe Madison was in leadership in Michigan, Detroit specifically, Detroit branch NAACP. Being able to sit not uncritically, but to sit with policymakers who are also long distance runners, who can walk us through policy, so that people who say, well, I'm not voting because, parties are the same, or, it's not enough. We need to have a radical critique and analysis. Okay. Listen to Congressman Scott explain the impact of loan forgiveness for public service workers, for firefighters and police officers and school teachers who have had tens and in some cases hundreds of thousands of dollars forgiven out of their loans. Not because there's any new law or any new legislation, but simply because who occupies the White House can make a determination whether to instruct cabinet officers to act on policy that's already on the books. And so when Congressman Scott talked about the fact that of the millions of dollars, of the billions of dollars in student loan forgiveness available to public servants, because they chose a profession that most people do not want to do, but that no one can live without. I'm thinking now specifically about teachers, that in a Trump administration, none of that debt was forgiven. Not because they blocked the law, but simply because they didn't enforce or didn't choose to prioritize the policy, because they have contempt for you, naked, utter contempt for you, led by a little man, a very little man who doesn't pay his own workers. And that a change in administration would mean that you could apply for and receive something that by law is yours to get. It may seem like a small thing. And again, I'm not mad at, I'm not angry at. I understand the theoretical reasons why those of, my friends are, and I mean this, friends, sisters, and brothers who stress the duopoly, are very critical of Democrats and Republicans, as am I, of course, the duopoly. But so I understand them, but I also understand that many of them, particularly those who went to school, have debt. And I think they would rather not have their debt forgiven. Let me pause there, because many of them have had their debt forgiven. So while they're saying both parties are the same, one party made it possible for them to have debt forgiven so they can say that from their comfortable university professor positions without that debt. So in some ways, their lives refute their policymaking action. Although there is a case, I was talking with a sister this week, Palestinian colleague, and I say colleague in a very specific sense, academic sense, and member of the academy, who said that, we should have a public debate about whether or not supporting the Democrats in this election cycle is going to help the Palestinians. And I said, I'm not interested in a debate. Again, Mariba Kelsey in my mind, in my ear, let us agree to agree. We can have a public conversation. Now, between now and November the 5th, I have to do the calculus as to whether or not taking out that moment of time is going to be the most valuable use of my time. And I think that it would be, in a sense, because there may be, and there are some people who are, quote, unquote, on the fence, who are close to the edge, who are within the border. The fence is a border too, remember? People say, how's anybody undecided? No, I can absolutely see the angst. We reached out to my brother, Andre Carson, Congressman Carson, who, along with Keith Ellison, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, one of the very few Muslims in the United States Congress. Carson out of Indianapolis, who I first met when he was in the Nation of Islam, providing some layered protection for Tupac Shakur at Indiana Black Expo back in the 90s. But what does it mean to be a Muslim of African descent who is not descended from Muslims who came to the United States from other places, but who is descended from Africans who were captive here? And to have come into Islam as Keith Ellison did and Andre Carson did through the Nation of Islam, who have solidarity with the Palestinians, not only as human beings first, but as Muslims. And all Palestinians are not Muslim, who do not carry the regional border-based angst and or in some places open contempt for the Palestinians, because other Muslims in other artificially generated human borders called countries may say, well, they are a pawn in the larger game, and we'll pretend like we have solidarity, but we're going to hang back and see what is our interest toward Israel. Well, that's not the baggage that you will find among many Muslims in the United States who are eligible to vote in the coming election, because they are not looking at it as a matter of regional politics, but rather as a matter of principle and way of knowing. So I'm saying all that as a backdrop to say that none of that conversation will be possible were it not for that platform. And that platform as it exists wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for you. And so talking the talk and then walking the walk makes it possible. And to have a little bit of the fire passed on through the torch of Joe Madison and being in conversation with so many of his comrades and colleagues, and then subsequent iterations of folk like Larry Daniels Favor and L. Joy Williams and Reese Colbert and Clay Kane. I mean, you know, to be able to do that because you put it there for us to be able to do is a responsibility that if, you know, and maybe as the years unfold, because again, the borders are very interesting. The universities are borders. You know, I've taken very seriously a life, almost all my adult life since I was 25 years old. So at this point, that's 35 years almost of teaching in different universities, black ones, white ones. You know, I would do that every day because, as the Yoruba would say, the world is a shrine. Yeah, I believe, in fact, live the fact that the world is a classroom, including these commitments. So, yeah, again, it's just so very important. And so we know then again that, you know, like I said, today is election day. November the 5th is the last day people can vote, but it's not election day. Or we shouldn't be thinking about it as an election day. We should be thinking as the last election day in what is now a countrywide series of election days. And here, you know, in the Delaware, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, we know that, as you said yesterday, and reminded folks in terms of callers who were calling in, that early voting, what they call early voting, but election day started on the 24th of October in Maryland and will only continue for 1 week. It's only 1 week of what they would call early voting or a series of election days. And now that we're in it, we know that we passed the 30 million person voting mark yesterday, in person and or mail in the United States of America. And that, of course, the mediating forces that stand between the world and us, the world and we, trying to narrate and interpret what that means. And, you know, there's a very interesting and useful, I think, tracking website, and I'll copy it here and put it in both chats, although we have crack folk in all of our communicative devices who will do this already. And I've already put it in the chats here so everybody can see. From the University of Florida Election Lab, they do a real-time tally of early voting. And it's interesting to look at it. More than 100 million people voted early in 2020. We're in the middle of the pandemic, of course. We said a conversion that the white nationalists have been trying to beat back now for quite some time. More than 100 million, as I said, voted early in 2020 out of 158 million votes cast. Now, by the accounts on this tracker and all the folks who are then using the tracker and using the updated information to try to interpret, in other words, to stand between the world and us, what is the interpretation of what this means? You know, they're rushing these narratives. And at this point, according to voter registration, not how they voted, and every state doesn't have the requirement that you register by party affiliation for the general election. By those who are registered by party affiliation, according to the tracker, it's about 42% Democrats have voted in that 30 million plus who are registered as Democrats, 35% who are registered as Republicans, and 23% who are not registered in either of those parties, regardless of whatever formation they may have declared. In Pennsylvania, 61% out of the 1.2 million votes cast, or 1.2 or so people are voting as we speak, cast. 29% Republican, 9% not Democrat or Republican. In 2020, those numbers were 72% Democrat, 19% Republican, 9% neither party. North Carolina, out of 2 million plus votes, 35% Democrat, 34% Republican, 31% neither party registration, versus 2020, 43%, 28%, and 29% respectively. Nevada, all people who can vote in Nevada who are registered, they get mail-in ballots that they then can turn back in. At this point, 40% Republican, 23% Democrat, and in versus 45% Democrat and 33% Republican in 2020. And I could go on, but I'll stop there to make this point. We don't know what those numbers mean, except records are being broken. Now, we don't know how many of those people who are in, clearly a large chunk of people who are not registered as Democrats or Republicans. We don't know who they vote. We don't know who anybody voted for. We will find that out at some point. I'm pretty confident that point will not be November the 5th. Because the tactic of the white nationalists, as we've talked about many times, and as people are beginning now, as they begin to focusing in on, is DELAY, my friends, DELAY, 5 letters, DELAY, delay. That is the Muppet MAGA Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. If they can get it to the House, they are not only fully prepared to steal the presidential election of 2024, they are fully equipped to do it. And so whenever we get the tally, and we may never get the tally completely, we certainly know that more people intended to vote for Al Gore in 2020 than intended to vote for George W. Bush. And the Supreme Court, in an early preview of the embarrassing, they're not embarrassed. You have to have some sense of morality to be embarrassed. In an early preview of where they were headed, even as John Boyd Roberts, Neil Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett, 3 current justices of the Supreme Court, were in Florida at the time, participating in Republican efforts to throw the election. Kavanaugh, I'm sorry, not Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, Roberts, and Coney Barrett. Although Kavanaugh and Roberts were very clearly and very effectively, thoroughly white nationalist operatives. Coney Barrett less so. Then, and in some ways now, as we're seeing her emerge as a justice on the court. But Supreme Court showed they played an early hand of where they were going with Bush versus Gore. But we clear when they stopped counting ballots, and to the tune of 537 votes in Florida, the Supreme Court stopped the state of Florida from exercising its responsibility, because states control elections, except in the case of Bush versus Gore, when the federal government reached in through the Supreme Court, said, stop counting Gore is gaining. We got to give this to Bush now. But at any rate, we don't know who went in and voted. We just know the registrations are running this way. But what the mediating forces are doing, standing between the world and us, is trying to interpret what those numbers mean. And I just want to interject one thing that we should pay attention to here, because, the mass media is having a wonderful time saying, it's almost as if you can see the rooting interests of capitalism by the headlines. Here we are. This is the Financial Times weekend. European Union braced for possible Trump win. Yeah, okay. You got over here, race to lead United States is neck and neck in final stretch. And they're saying, the early voting is showing a surge in Republican early voting. Question. This is very easy. Prior to this, and of course, the people, the editors, the owners, however they're framing the mediating force, is saying, clearly this is the narrative that is being pushed. These are all, they push narratives. Biden's too old. Don't speak of Trump's elders. Okay. Biden's out the race. Well, we can't use the old trope anymore. Okay. Donald Trump is clearly unwell, but we can't really push that too much. But if we ignore it completely, people won't read us. Let me be very clear. You know who's reading the newspaper? Greg Carr. Karen Hunter reads the newspaper. 5 other people, all of them be with them. If you're talking about black people, most of them are in class or in narrative newbie, but that's it. The rest of them not reading the newspaper. So your influence. But here's the thing. Let's apply some simple logic, replacing ourselves as the mediating force between the world and us, and say, okay, prior to 2024, the white nationalists like, I'm not voting on no early voting. Nobody should early vote. You need 5 times the ID unless you got a gun permit. Now I can use that in Texas and North Carolina. Yeah, but I'm voting on the day, and we should stop all them immigrants. We should stop all them other people who want to steal the election from voting. Now those people, as the narratives go, well, these are the people Trump is telling them it's okay to vote. Okay, let's just apply some simple first grade math. Let's say you got 10 people who are Republicans, and 9 of them like, I'm gonna vote on the day. Then their master tells them, it's okay to vote early and you better vote early. If 6 of those 9 no longer going to vote on November the 5th, but voted on the 24th of October, does that increase, decrease, or keep the number the same of the Republicans that voted? Don't think too hard. My point is this. The media, between the world and us, surging Republican, yeah, they're cannibalizing the people who was going to vote on the day. Fools. It's very clear that it's very clear that the mediating forces also remind us that Trump's base is not expanding. So if they're voting early, that just means they took it from one place, put it to the other place. The question is how many first time? The question, you got to go what they call in polling data to the tabs. You got to go beyond the headlines, because between the world and us stands the mediating force, and they're interested in a horse race. So that's what they're going to promote. We can talk more about that, but we're running for the borders now. And we're also close to the edge of borders that could determine in many ways the next iteration of the species, our experience as a species, not as Americans, not as Canadians, not as Jamaicans or Haitians, not as English or French, not as Sudanese or Ethiopians or Nigerians or South Africans, not as Iranians or Iraqians. No. Turkeyans. We are now talking about a species, global level. So let's think about that. What are the lessons? Well, I was thinking about this. It just, the things pop in your head. Thinking about borders and edges. There are some people in here in our collective convening, our weekly convening, who remember the game Operation. Remember Operation? We remember Operation, right? We never had an Operation because, Operation is the kind of thing that Haywood Carr is like, okay, what is it? You get the tweezers and you go down and if you hit the air. I saw it on TV. Mediating forces. Oh, okay. You got some Operation money? I love the genius of Black parents. You know what I'm saying? You got some Operation money? Now, if you come back in here, I can operate. We can do Operation. You want kind of Operation out? No, so we never had Operation, but if we saw it, like if the school bought it and brought it to school, you see, it's fascinating, right? Because if your tweezers and them little things touch the edge, well, that's the metaphor. What happens when you touch the edges? What happens when you touch the edges? Donald Trump talking about building a wall. That wall is impossible because the physical walls that you could build around countries will be laughed at by the movement of the things that are truly influential, by the things that are beyond borders. It ain't just doctors without borders. It's money without borders, as we've been talking about. And so, what happens when you touch the edges? Interesting. People are close, countries are close to the edge, capital is close to the edge. This is, as I said, going back to today's newspaper, the Financial Times Weekend, the European Union braced for possible Trump win. Get beyond the headline. EU capitals are racing to draw up assessments of the bloc's key vulnerabilities if Donald Trump is reelected to the White House, as polls suggest the fight is tilting toward the ex-president. As polls decide, the mediators between the world and us, the polls are tight. Yeah, ignore the polls. Early voting, so it's a surge in Republicans. Are they coming from the people who would vote on the 5th? Ignore all that. We're trying to keep your eyeballs and clicks and likes. Why? Because we're trying to make this money and we don't want Trump at us and we want you to keep watching. We don't know what's going to happen. Neil better. Okay, follow the money that doesn't have the board. The money is not touching the edges in the game Operation. The money is the game Operation. They got you with the tweezers in your hand trying not to touch the borders by saying, build a wall. If you don't build a wall, if you don't build, where's that electricity coming from? Oh, that's in the game that has a plug that's plugged into the wall. So your question should be, who owns the electric company? Huh? Man, forget you. I'm trying to get this thing out before. Why are you looking at because you have been trained to look at those borders if they're real. And meanwhile, the real key was the minute that you sent somebody who wasn't Haywood Carr into the store to buy the game. And that don't give a damn what you do with it. Plug it up. Don't plug it up. They got your money. My father, you got Operation money. The question becoming, for the distraction that you want with your whole heart, do you have the thing that's a proxy for power in this society? The money, because I work at the VA hospital every day of my life. And I got to decide between pinto beans, bologna, the mortgage, the car note when we get a car, and operate what you call operation. No problem. Now you get old enough. Hey, like Karen Hunter, get that broom, get that tally sheet. You're gonna work in the store. Got you. Greg Carr, you old enough to push a lawnmower? You go out there and buy whatever you want. Yes, sir. Now I'm out here. But the thing that flows across all the borders is the money. Do you have operation money in a society where there are one or two people going to win the presidential election? It's going to be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris in the United States of America. It's not going to be Claudia de la Cruz or Cornel West or Jill Stein. It's not going to be them. If you want to vote for them, that's your ability. I won't say you're right, because there's no right to vote in the federal constitution. And you're going to find out after this election, depending on which way it goes, whether or not you even have the illusion of a right to vote. It's very clear. But you do what you want, but one of them two gonna win. Now, if you're trying to send a message, no problem. I'm gonna come to that in a second, because again, this is in the second of a three-part piece, and it's very important for us to understand what's going on. You know, states like the European Union, they're beginning to Trump-proof their formation. The European Union is not a country. Europe is an idea. The European Union is a bunch of different countries who come together on issues of what they perceive, their leadership perceives to be mutual interests. So free movement between the borders, free trade between the borders, except when you get animated by white nationalism like Brexit and mess yourself up, and mutual defense, depending on the context, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, which then would spread the EU across the water borders, creating the illusion of larger formations and backing it up with force. So the idea of mutual defense and aid, the idea that if you attack a NATO member, you attack all NATO members, which is what should scare the living feces out of everybody in this room right now, whenever right now is, whether it be Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or next Saturday, or beyond. If there is a beyond, for those who own and can then thereby control the technology that allows us to communicate in real time or recorded time, it should scare the feces out of everybody to think that an attack on one is an attack on all. When you have Russia, we'll get to the BRICS in a moment, India, China, South Africa, and more, trying to create and having created a formation that is recognizing another border and close to another edge, as we'll talk about in a minute. But the European Union bracing for a possible Trump win, well, what are some of the things that they're doing? The preparations include formal talks between EU ambassadors and the staff of the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, as well as informal groups of EU diplomats. Trump has vowed to impose a flat 10% tariff on all imports, and is critical of U.S. support for Kiev and skeptical of NATO, which underpins Europe's defense. Polling suggests Trump is in a dead heat. You can ignore all that. That's the between the world politics of mediation, representation. You can ignore that, because it just feeds a steady diet of E. coli in that McDonald's called mass media that we're consuming. He says, a EU diplomat says, in my personal point of view, we will be in trouble, deep trouble, if Trump wins. The disruptive element will be huge. They don't like that. And guess what? Page 4 in Financial Times, this story, that you got to look for. Again, that's why I read the physical newspaper. I'm not surfing the web. I don't want the algorithm picking. With the algorithm of the editors have already picked what I'm going to consume here, but I prefer to see it in a way that's splayed out, so I can begin to see relationships. Why is this here? Why is this not here? And see stories I wouldn't have seen anywhere else, even if I was on, and I am on, because I have the digital description too, the FT website. I'd have to go digging for, or I could just sit and page through the paper, look at the headlines, and then from there begin to formulate how I'm going to enter additional information as a narrative strategy. There's a method to the madness. Here's on page 4. I'm sorry, it's the Dutch coalition. EU told to stop lecturing developing world. What? What? Sound like Amber Ruffin. Anyway, I know Amber says what. Greg doesn't say what. Greg says, where can I find the information? EU told to stop lecturing developing world. Andy Bounds and Henry Ford. The participation of EU partner nations in a summit in Russia. Where was that? Or that would be the BRICS. Yikes! Run for the border. The participation of EU partner nations in a summit in Russia hosted by Vladimir Putin is a message for Brussels, that's where the EU headquarters is, to stop lecturing other parts of the world, said the top official representing the bloc's government. European Council President Charles Michel told the Financial Times the EU needed to show more respect towards developing countries with which the organization had signed strategic trade or political cooperation accords if it wanted to combat Chinese and Russian efforts to expand influence in Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. Friends, while we've got two politicians running for president of the United States, two major party politicians running for president of the United States, and several other non-major party candidates running for president of the United States, running for the borders, well, guess what the world is close to the edge of? A renegotiation of the terms of how the people who live within those borders are going to experience their quality of life. The hillbillies. And I use hillbilly as a metaphor for the underinformed, the ignorant, not willfully ignorant, because they've been fed a steady diet as well. A steady diet of Mama June and monster truck rallies, a steady diet of WWE and whatever else you can generate that will keep you distracted. The hillbilly horde in Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, the hillbilly horde in New York and California, the hillbilly horde in North Carolina and Georgia, the hillbilly horde that thinks that somehow that Donald John Trump's going to bring your job back. Your job that has currently either been replaced by technology or being done in Mexico or South Korea. That this man is somehow going to bring your job back. You've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, run amok, led astray. Because the mediating force between the world and you has an interest in feeding you that steady diet of E. coli. And now that you're sick, you're going to wander into a voting booth that you normally would wander in on November the 5th. But because you wandered in on October 21st, somehow that same mediating force wants to generate the idea that there's a horse race and that you've somehow surged. You're being animated by something that not only is not possible, like a wall. You could build a wall between Mexico and the United States. You could absolutely build a wall. You're not going to get the Mexicans to pay for it. Why? Because once you build the wall, you'll realize that those trucks that are coming through the passes in the wall are owned by the company that had you vote for the fool that allowed them to get even more market share and took more of your jobs to Mexico. But you're out there screaming, we got a wall, and the truck that is coming through the wall represents money. Do you have wall money? You ain't got no wall money. And guess what? You standing there at that wall screaming is the equivalent of Greg Carr at 8 years old. If he had an operation game, he done touched the door. And guess what? At least in the operation game, it's just the sound of a shot. In your case, your head, your whole little head, your whole skull, as you banged it in frustration against that wall that your master allowed you to build as a distraction, cracked. And now that you got a cracked skull, you went to the hospital and realized that you ain't got no kind of care. Obamacare, no care. And now you just got a cracked skull, mad. But you got a wall. You're close to the edge now, friends. And why I brought that up in this context is that what you're seeing is the most important event of last week in the globe, in some ways. Some people would argue. I would say there's something competitive. That's why Lamont and I talked this week with Gerald Horn. My man Gerald Horn was the summit of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa that took place in Russia. And it's very interesting to understand what happened in Russia over the this past week. The BRICS, they met, they wrapped up the meeting the day before yesterday. It's a global iteration of what we might see domestically. I'm going to kind of that'll be the last movement we talk about today. What the BRICS and the European Union might foreshadow in terms of the United States of America. Very interesting. Is the BRICS a contemporary echo iteration, possible reimagining of what happened in Bandung, Indonesia in 1955, 10 years after the end of so-called World War II? World War II, which was triggered by the rise in the 1930s of Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler, who never won a majority of German voters. in the elections that put him in elected power and eventually as chancellor and then as Führer. Adolf Hitler, who understood, I was watching an interview with a guy who just wrote another book on Germany. He's an expert on that era, because we've been talking a lot about fascism. And I should probably pause here and just put a pin here on the question of fascism, because again, fascism is so important. Fascism is a word that we don't see in human language. We don't see in human consciousness prior to the 20th century. It refers specifically to a nationalist movement that was controlled the government of Italy. And we know Benito Mussolini from the early 20s until the 40s, when they killed him and hung him upside down by his feet. Benito Mussolini, who was born in 1883 and died there in 1945. It's the principles of the ideology of something called the fascisti. So be a fascist, it grew out of this nationalist fascisti movement, or the fasci movement. A fascisti would be you're in the fasci movement. The fasci movement in Italy became prominent at the end of the First World War. So this fascism, Italy, Germany, after the First World War, so-called World War, first inter-European conflict that pulled some other people in, that they call the World War, because between the world and us stands the mediating influence of Western Eurasia, known as Europe. As we talked about last week, why is Europe not a peninsula of Asia? Well, a lot of its perception. So, but the point is this: that movement, which took over the government, and then gave the fasci then the combattimento by Mussolini, who started in 1919. They were anti-communists. They're going to capture the government. Mussolini understood, Hitler understood. You don't need everybody, but you need your core believers to capture the apparatus of state. In Germany, that capture meant, according to scholars, roughly a third of 50% plus one. In other words, you don't need everybody in the party you're trying to capture to be a fascist. You need about a third of the people in the party to be with you ideologically, and the rest of the people not to leave the party. So then when you capture the party, your people had a majority of the people who are in the party. And that's why Trump, who understands this, whatever else he doesn't understand, which is damn near anything else, he understands this. He said, why is Trump talking all racist? He's not talking to you, our country. He's not talking to you, our country. He's talking to our country. That third of 51%. And if he can get that and get the capture, then Project 2025, he just stuffs everything else down your throat, which is why the working definition of fascism, even though we know its roots, comes down to this: any form of behavior perceived as autocratic, intolerant, or oppressive, especially the advocacy of a particular viewpoint or practice in a manner that seeks to enforce conformity, most effectively by capturing the apparatus to do so. Most effectively. So in other words, you can say, you sound like a fascist. I think no woman should ever terminate a pregnancy. But she was raped, and she's going, I don't give a damn. We need babies. That's why you see some of these people out here, I'm talking about black people too. I'm a Christian, I could never support abortion. Fine. That's not fascist. What's fascist is when you try to tell somebody else that they got to believe what you believe, and you try to impose your will to impose a particular viewpoint. Now it's fascism. And you know when it gets to be hardcore fascism? When you have the ability to exercise your attempt to impose something on somebody else, and you've joined a bunch of people. You have that ability because you've joined a bunch of people who ain't got no problem with it, or who say, well, it'll be all right, it'll work out. That's that less than 2/3 of the 51%. That's how Hitler came to power. Them people didn't leave the party, that growing National Socialist Party. They didn't leave the electoral politics. And because they didn't leave their party, Hitler got into power because they thought, well, it won't get too bad. First, they came for the communists. And I said nothing. They came for the Jews. I said nothing. Then they came for me. If they come in the morning for you, at night they're going to come for me. So I think they got to be doing something about them immigrants. Wait a minute, aren't your people from Mexico? Yeah, but I was born here. Let me tell you something. You read Project 2025. You think they're going to stop with 11 million? And let me be very clear about that as well on the way to, like I said, the third point I wanted to make today, and then we're going to wrap it up for today. This is the October 2024 issue of Mother Jones. What if Trump actually deports 11 million people? The hillbillies with their guns on their hips, riding to the Walmart to celebrate the Trump victory, and who realized then that their chewy plastic pizza now costs 5 times as much. And the draws that they went to replace because they shown themselves when they realized the mistake they made are now no longer $2 a piece, but $30 a piece, because you got rid of all the people that kept the prices low and then moved the factory to where you sent the people to. Oh my God. What if Trump actually deports 11? Oh, Lee Greenwood, proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free. Do you know you got freedom money? Anyway, the point is that the question of fascism is to promote the aims of people who ain't got, you got contempt for you too. And if they come for them in the morning, they coming for you at night. They're gonna come for all of us, because Stephen Miller's dream is to make this a white country. It'll never happen. But anyway, let me not get off track. The BRICS is what I was talking about, because while we're here inside these borders, there are other borders being renegotiated, and the question becomes, with the question of BRICS, is this Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa? Is this a renegotiation? Is it a renegotiation? Is it a conceiving of what happened in 1955 in Bandung, Indonesia, 10 years after Germany was defeated, Italy was defeated, Japan was defeated in so-called World War II? In other words, the last time you tried to renegotiate these borders within Europe, guess what happened? Those borders that you drew on the map for everybody else as you tried to consume the whole world, Europe, the age of Europe came to a screeching halt, almost. So imagine World War I and World War II as the rambling wreck called European imperialism, born 4 centuries before. Imagine World War I and World War II as the engine seizing up on the age of empire. And as the age of empire seized up, because they were close to the edge, having fought each other since the beginning, in that moment, guess what? The rest of the world is like, they shooting. I made you look. You're a slave to a page in my rhyme book. In other words, while y'all fighting, we're going to start fighting too. They're too weak now. They're not as strong as they used to be to keep their feet on the necks of the rest of the world. So all those people that England transported across the ocean to build their colonies that then broke with them, all those people that France imported across the borders, the oceans, to keep their empire going. Well, the Germans done punch out in the mouth for the first half of the damn 20th century. The Italians, who never had a whole lot except East Africa and so a handful of other places, now they've been defeated, and now all y'all bloody. Here's our chance: Caribbean independence. Here's our chance: African independence. Here's our chance: the movement in the United States called the Civil Rights Movement, because the United States is going to occupy that vacuum in European power that they've been dreaming of since the late 19th century. And for a brief moment in time, they become the superpower. Hold aside for a minute Russia, or maybe bring Russia back in the picture in 2024. But the point I'm trying to make is the borders being renegotiated. You run it for the borders, but you're close to the edge. And the closer the edge of European empire begins to have to be renegotiated. It doesn't mean it's over, but it means the engine is seizing up. So in order to keep this thing going, you're going to have to perform some surgery on your car, on your automobile. In order to keep this going, you're going to have to perform some surgery on your social structure. So you got to maybe create some new institutions: Bretton Woods agreements, International Money Fund, World Bank, maybe some political formations that acknowledge the fact that you can't keep your foot on the neck of the whole world like you used to do. So you do the United Nations in 1945. As I said again, EU told to stop lecturing developing world. Do you think that Linda Thompson Greenfield, the U.S. ambassador, the black UN ambassador in the Biden administration, is pushing the possibility of Africa having 2 permanent seats on the UN Security Council now out of the goodwill of her heart? I would love to believe that that's true. And maybe it is true in her heart as an African person, but her job is to do U.S. foreign policy. And United States understands, as the Turk told the Corleones in The Godfather Part 1, the Don ain't even got that kind of muscle anymore. In other words, the U.S. got a lot of muscle. Still, the empire. But let's be clear, it ain't got the muscle like it used to. And as people start saying, I'm not going to play the game, I'm going to get up from the game of operation. I'm going to get up from the game of thinking that I have to do what you said because you laid down the rules. We're going to make up our own rules. Well, as they get up from the table, you start trying to keep them coming back to you. Or as Clyde Taylor says, when you turn off the movies, when you turn off the crazy mass media, when you turn off the thing that is feeding you this diet that is enfeebling you, that thing will then try to reattract your attention by opening up a little bit. Maybe as Stephen A. Smith argues with his friend Sean Hannity. Maybe Charlamagne Tha God starts talking like he got some sense. A drowning man offers you his hand. Don't leave CNN. Come on back. Now, Crying Van Jones is beyond redemption. But, maybe we can get a few more people in. Mike Dyson, where's Dyson? Dyson and some Jerry, bring him up. We got to argue with Nancy Grace. Hold on. Keep his phone because you might text her later. But we got to keep this argument. Why? Because the whole thing, the only reason the borders work is if you believe that those are borders that you have to honor. Well, they were at the BRICS, and the BRICS in 1955 in Indonesia, all those countries who said, we ain't going with the United States, and we ain't going with the Russians. We're non-aligned. The so-called non-aligned movement. You remember deep in COVID, we did a whole session on the Bandung Conference. Most of those books are in storage now. We talked about them. But is the BRICS Bandung? No, I don't think so. But it's now BRICS. I shouldn't say the BRICS. It's not just Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa now. Formal members now include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. And the question is, when is guess what? Did you say Iran? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said Iran. So they got people with nuclear weapons in the BRICS. Yeah, Donald Trump told Joe Rogan the number of countries that have nuclear weapons, and everybody started laughing. You don't even know how many countries got nuclear weapons. Let's be very clear. Most of us don't. But let's be clear about this as well. It doesn't matter. Donald Trump doesn't matter. You think he's going to be running the government? He's a signing pen, friends. He's a signing pen. But at any rate, Iran in there now. This is a problem. By the way, they're meeting in Brazil, the G20. Those are the 20 largest economies in the world. They're meeting in Brazil in November the 18th and 19th. BRICS is meeting in South Africa and in 2025, I think. And the UN Climate Summit is meeting. No, BRICS is meeting in Brazil in 2025, and the UN Climate Summit is going to bring Brazil next year as well. My point is the world's going to go on regardless of the US election, but as these things are being thought through and thought about, those borders are not going to determine the progress that will be made. Now, I'll tell you all something as well. Let me see if I can find it. I think maybe I have it on one of the tabs that I opened up here as I was thinking about some of these things. I don't see it, and I'm not going to spend much time looking for it. Patrick Bond, here we go. Yeah, Patrick Bond is a professor at the University of Johannesburg. I first encountered Professor Bond here. Yeah, Kendra, you said brick is brown NATO. I see the chat. I think that's probably a very good way of phrasing it, because there are some political actors in the BRICS. And by the way, you had about a little more than 3 dozen countries, leaders or representatives who met at the BRICS, because there's a lot of countries. We talked about this Monday night, and we talked about it on the air actually yesterday. Wednesday. Guy from South Africa, we think he's South African, from Maryland, called in to Urban View Mornings, and we talked about the BRICS. We talked with Gerald Horn about it, and then we talked with one of the callers about it for about 10 minutes, actually, long conversation. Because Patrick Bond would argue, and I started reading him the first time I took students to South Africa, and I was in the bookstores, and I saw one of his books that I thought was interesting, had an interesting title. Patrick Bond, what was it called? Talk Left, Walk Right. And on the cover, it had a picture of Thabo Mbeki, the then president of South Africa, with George W. Bush. And what Professor Bond was saying at the time, he was at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. You may have heard, of y'all in Newbie, Jack Cole and I talk about that, because she's been in KwaZulu-Natal. And I remember, and I now have all his books, him saying that's a neoliberal move. In other words, they're talking left, they're talking nationalizing everything, but their policy is showing that it's not that different from the capitalist ambitions of these other countries, including the ones that had their feet on the neck. And I think that that's very important. So what Patrick Bond would say, and this is a book that came out about maybe 9 or 10 years ago, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, an anti-capitalist critique. This is the same Patrick Bond, who's now at the University of Johannesburg, and Ana Garcia. And Sam Moyo has an interesting chapter in here called Scramble, Resistance, and a New Non-Alignment Strategy. So these BRICS countries want to be non-aligned with any of, with the United States and the European Union. However, guess who was there? The Turks, Turkey. Yeah. Oh yeah, the president of Turkey was there shaking hands with Putin, who's smiling like a Cheshire cat. My point is that what happens when BRICS countries are also members of the G20? BRICS countries are also heavy allies of the United States, like Egypt on military. Well, that means that you can't just say they're against us. No, they're for you too. Well, the Chinese and the Russians and the Turks and the Egyptians and the South Africans. It gets messy. So what are you doing? Well, some people might call it a multipolar strategy. You want these powers to have feet in a lot of different camps. Patrick Bond would call it sub-imperial, meaning what? You got the empire, United States, Europeans, and you got the sub-empire, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the second order. But the thing that holds them together is what Bond might say is a rules-based international order. But it's going to reinforce the current order. As John Clark would say, in some stories, it's no good, guys. I'm saying all that to say this. When you observe the borders like it's a game of operation and afraid to touch the borders for fear of what's going to happen to you, instead of understanding who designed the game and who plugged it up and who runs the electricity company that's got you in there obsessed on them little tweezers trying to not touch the edge, when you respect the edge more than the context, the social structure that created that game, you're missing the fact that if you don't have your passport right now, get it. If you don't have friends and relationships beyond the country you're in right now, as we know this is a global conversation, develop them. If you're a business person, trade partnerships and supply chains that are beyond the little proud to be in America, where at least I know I'm free, the flag you're waving at your rally was made in China or Vietnam. Don't be stupid, or be stupid. We really don't care. But my point is this. Actually, I shouldn't say we really don't care, even though I find it hard to maintain a spirit of generosity when somebody literally got their fucking foot on my neck. What we have to understand is that the borders of the world are shifting. The BRICS ain't the saviors of the world. The BRICS ain't the hyper-capitalist evil empire of the world either. The BRICS are human beings trying to maximize their authority and power and leveraging the political borders that we all, quote unquote, respect, those borders drawn in the true age of empire, which was the age of Europe, which is rapidly coming to an end. We have to understand that solidarity, we should write that word everywhere. Solidarity is the politics that will allow us to transcend a number of these artificial borders, create or strengthen other relationships that will keep us back from the dangerous edges and allow us to bring forward the kind of human solidarity that can transcend any local set of circumstances. Now, the last major movement for today. What I said about the EU, what if the United States looked like the European Union, y'all? Come on, boy. Where this book come? This book keeping me up at night. Here we are. This is Dean Erman Chemerinsky for the Black nativists who are making the nobody should get reparations except those descended from captives. This Professor Chemerinsky, who testified before the California Reparations Commission the day before I did, when we were all doing it on Zoom, and all the Black nativists, I don't care what acronym goes with them, FBA, ADOS, B1, B2, B52, B52 bomber. Anyway, the nativists all cheered when Chemerinsky told them that lineage might be a legal strategy, would be a legal strategy that might be more successful than race. He didn't say it would be successful. In fact, he explicitly said he didn't think it would be, but he said to the degree that one of the strategies might evade more legal challenges, it would be the lineage strategy. And then I came on the next day and said, no, I think what we have to pursue in terms of there are two things to a reparation strategy. One is repair. You do that for yourself. Nobody else gonna do that for you, and nobody else should do it for you. You shouldn't be thinking about that. But in terms of demands on the state, demands on resources, the best way to approach this is a strategy that makes access to resources equitable across the board. It's still not going to resolve what is owed, because there's nothing owed, because they're not going to pay you, because you're assuming a common framework. And the more you think about it, the more absurd that should occur to you, because you're appealing to something, as Malcolm X would say, they don't understand. As he said, you're speaking a language they don't understand. You can make a repair demand that could survive all legal challenges if you lift the floor for everyone. And from that lifted floor, people can repair themselves. Oh, they came for me in the chat. I want not half, not a quarter, not a fraction, not 75%, not 99.99999%. I want all of the smoke. All of it. Because it's baby smoke. Because if you stop to think about it, the function of repair is something you generate from within. What you're talking about is restitution. What you're talking about is not repairing yourself, but being made financially or resource whole. That's not coming back in the capitalist side. You don't understand how capitalism works. Anyway, Dean Chemerinsky, at the time, the dean of the School of University of California, Berkeley School of Law. This is his latest book. It just came out. It's called No Democracy Lasts Forever: How the Constitution Threatens the United States. Now, I've been saying this for a long time, and I'm not saying that because I'm trying to be right. I don't know whether I wish I was right or wrong, quite frankly. But what Chemerinsky argues in this book, I think that is very, very, very important. And maybe we'll pick up with this in part 3, in our final part. Chemerinsky is making the argument that the breakup of this country is probably inevitable. You know, I talk about all the time, the United States is not going to be here, and I'm not going to shed a tear if I'm still alive. I may not be here. You know, maybe it may take 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years. It may take 2 years. It may take 6 months. Because what the EU is doing, EU is braced for possible Trump win. Guess who also is bracing? As we talked about last week, California, New York. They're calling it Trump-proofing those countries. Chemerinsky, I got this book this week. Reading the book, you get to the conclusion. He says, well, he's saying the Constitution can be fixed, but it's going to require a constitutional convention. He says in chapter 11, if nothing changes, can and should the United States survive? Can and should the United States survive? Now, for the people who have some iteration of I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free, which I assume is most people in our conversation. Because we don't think critically about those stars and stripes. We do think critically about them, but somehow we can't imagine a world where they didn't exist, as if that world weren't the world as we know it today, in the living memory of some people in this room. There are people in here right now who didn't have 50 stars on the flag when they were born, before Alaska and Hawaii. By the way, Alaska and Hawaii are not part of contiguous United States of America. Chemerinsky says, why would you think that you couldn't have a formation where California and Michigan weren't part of a new country just because there's territory in between them? You know how the European Union works? This is a fascinating thought exercise. He says, what if nothing changes and the problems with American democracy become worse? What if the low public confidence in the government sinks further? Shout out to John Roberts, who's doing his best to tear up the floorboards on the country. What if the federal government becomes less effective, you think, and political polarization grows much greater, you think? He says, I predict that Americans will seriously talk about whether the United States should stay together as one country. Talk of secession is now a murmur, but it will become louder and more insistent. I do not know when that moment will be, but we all know that no democracy lasts forever. And there will be a point where ours is seriously questioned. Indeed, if a conservative Republican is elected president with Republicans in control of both houses of Congress, which could happen in the next 2 weeks, I have no doubt that states like California will see serious talk of secession. Neither do I, Dean. In fact, this book came out. It went to the printer clearly before the news is breaking. They are Trump proofing California as we speak. You Californians know something about that, I hope. He says, likewise, a liberal Democratic president and Democrats in control of both houses of Congress will fuel talk of secession in places like Texas. They've talked about it before. They will talk about it again. Sharp ideological disagreements among the states have always existed. For the first 75 years of American history, they clashed over slavery. That will be us. which ultimately led to the Civil War. In the 20th century, Americans vehemently disagreed over the civil rights movement. That would be us. But the current gulf between the blue states and the red states is enormous, toxic, and growing. This is where I get off the board with, get out of the car, people like Dean Chemerinsky and everybody else. You see, for me, which is why I'm in Africana studies, not Black history, not Black philosophy or Black literature, not any of those, all the other academics are white studies, even though people are doing great work in them. Africana studies, the only process with a methodology that allows us to have a governance formation to ask who we are to each other, even as we engage the world, because standing between the world and me must be some mediating factor. It's always the case. You can't shrink the whole world down to just your experiences. And anytime you go beyond yourself, you're going to hit a mediator. Africana studies is the method, is the mediation that stands between the world and us. So we have to have a framework that helps us understand, baked into this structure, as Chemerinsky notes, is race, is anti-Blackness. As now I'm pointing over there like the book is still there. I got phantom memory of books that are now in storage, but if I sit here and think about what book was over my shoulder, I will remember Nikhil Pal Singh's book, Black is a Country, quoting Amir Baraka on that. In America, black is a country. Amir Baraka, whose son now, of course, probably you were in conversation with the mayor, Ras Baraka of Newark, who understands that hyper-local politics will allow us to build. This is what the third-party people are saying, and I agree with them wholeheartedly, except you seem to only say it every 4 years when you run for president of the United States. I didn't realize that was for head of the PTA or head of the neighborhood watch or head of the school board. No, it's not. It's for president of the United States. Oh, so you think somehow that, hey, you're going to be the president of the United States, or every 4 years trying to inject yourself at the top level of electoral politics in the country is somehow going to achieve your goal of hyper local politics. Shut that. Jill Stein, whatever, Dr. Stein, God bless you, or live a long life. You're not going to be the agent of chaos that you hope to be with the gleam in your eye. The point is this. He says, a 2021 poll administered by the University of Virginia Center for Politics found out that 4 of 10, 41% of Biden voters and half, 52% of Trump voters somewhat agree it would be best to split the country by red and blue states. Now, of course, you know why that doesn't work, right? As Gary Chambers tells you all the time, Prof, or as many people tell us all the time, as Roland Martin been saying since time immemorial, if we voted our numbers, the South would be blue if you're going to vote as Democrats. I'm not capable for the Democrats or Republicans here. I'm just making a point. If you look at electoral map, Mississippi is red, Louisiana is red, Alabama is red. You think if they split and seceded red and blue states, how long you think before Meemaw Kay Ivey, the governor of Alabama, gonna have a whole ass insurrection on her hands on behalf of the 3rd to 40% of Africans in the state of Alabama? Do you understand that if Alabama, which is why I don't refer to the South as the old Confederacy. I was born in the South. I was born in the volunteer state. I was born in one of the states that formed the Confederacy, not the old Confederacy. It never stopped being the Confederacy. In fact, you could argue that the Confederacy won the Civil War because now the whole damn country is the Confederacy. But the demographics lend to the fact that if Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, if Louisiana, if South Carolina, North Carolina were able to come together and maybe recruit into their orbit Kentucky and a few other places, if they were able to do that, and form a country, and then the Northeast had its own country, maybe starting in Virginia and coming on up through DC and Maryland and Delaware and Pennsylvania, going on up New York, coming on up the East Coast of New England states, and maybe going west to, let's say, past the Erie Canal, as you sing the song, all the way out to Michigan, maybe. And that's a country. And maybe Michigan takes Illinois and they have a country, or maybe they come with the East Coast. And maybe Iowa and all them places want to come together, North and South Dakota, and they have their own country. Where maybe the West Coast, all them places bordering the Pacific Ocean, Washington State, all the way down to California, maybe they become a country. Texas is going to go with the old Confederacy. Is it? As Colin Alred makes a run at the Sniveler, Rafael Cruz? Is it? Maybe today, maybe 5 years from now, maybe 10 years, but soon and very soon, they're going to see the king. Meaning what? The red states will fracture within themselves as those demographics keep changing. Erwin Chemerinsky asked the question, does the Constitution allow for secession? The answer is absolutely, because it has no prohibition on leaving the Union, friends, if you read the Constitution closely. In fact, the argument, and he makes this argument, a lot of law professors make, and legal scholars have made, and political scientists have made, that Abraham Lincoln, in sending the troops, broke the Constitution to save the Union. Why? Because ain't nothing said you couldn't leave. Oh no. And so when you see the Civil War, they went beyond the Constitution. And so I see people talking in the chat about that amendment in North Carolina. We talked about that on the radio. We can talk about that on Office Hours, because I'm about to wind up for now. But I'm bringing all this up, and I won't get much more deeply into Chemerinsky. It's a fascinating thing that he's raising. But Chemerinsky's whole point is that this could happen. He thinks it probably will happen at some point. And so that should reinforce our sense of resolve and also calm us about this current election cycle. Our people, as Stuart Carmichael, Kwame Ture used to say, our people will survive America. If you are so deeply invested in America that your sense is that somehow we will be harmed if there's no United States in the current formation that we have it, you're not wrong with that. There's going to be a lot of pain, which is why I said at the beginning, do you want a little pain now in terms of, pushing policymakers, if Kamala Harris wins, pushing policymakers to advance things that are clearly to our advantage, including and also the advantage of many other people who are among the least of these? Or do you want a lot of pain later when Trump wins and they try to impose all this and deport all these people and lock you up and close down the newspapers, which somehow Jeff Bezos thinks he can somehow ignore by telling his people not to run an endorsement, and thereby finishing off the teetering and doddering Washington Post once and for all for the three people, not myself included, who had some trust in it as some arbiter of information. If that happens and there is a fracture, maybe not in 2025, but in 2035 or 2028, you want to do Project 2025? Fine. You'll do it with a reduced number of states, the old Confederacy. That city state you're in called Washington, D.C., that colony that you're in called Washington, D.C., we're going to have that retrocede into Maryland and Virginia. Guess what? You got to move your capital. Well, you can put it back down there. You can't put it in Richmond. We got Virginia. Put it back in Montgomery. And play Dixie for 5 more minutes until those blacks who are trapped in Alabama stop going to play football for the University of Alabama and aren't going to migrate. They're just going to keep having babies. And at that point, K.I.V., what you going to do? You might have to go to one of them prisons that you built with COVID money. The point is this. The fracture will, in the long run, be good, I think. When I say the United States is over, I'm not looking at that as a bad thing. I'm looking at that as an inevitable thing. Going back to William Edward Burghardt Du Bois, the first book he published based on his Harvard University dissertation, 1896, The Suppression of the African Slave Trade to the United States of America, when he said the seeds for disunion were sowed in the federal Constitution. Once you did that to us, it was going to have to be resolved. And if you didn't resolve it in 1861 to 65 with the Civil War, which is what Ketanji Brown Jackson was trying to tell y'all in her dissents, if you didn't resolve it then, you're going to have to face it again 100 years later with the Civil Rights Movement. And if you didn't resolve it then, because you think somehow you can hold on to your shit, you're going to have to resolve it in 2024. And if you don't resolve it then fine, let's break it up. Because the thing that will break up the United States of America won't be black people who somehow think that the whole thing can operate. As Mike Harriet and I were talking on Monday night in office hours, Mike, being very generous and charitable, came in to talk about some comments he had made to Brother Ture, and they're talking about black people came here with no culture, but he clarified, no, we came here with culture and we Africanized or tried to Africanize this experiment called United States of America. But guess what? We failed, friends. We have constantly failed. I mean, failed at the level of the nation state. We failed because the Africanization of this polity called United States would require embracing our common humanity. And we've always done that. Derek Bell would call it the involuntary sacrifice. We didn't mean to do it and then erase ourselves as a consequence. But guess what? Unlike a lot of people, I have no commitment to the polity remaining as it is. And guess who else doesn't? Absent a radical restructuring, Herman Chemerinsky and any other sane human being who actually is a student of history. No democracy lasts forever. We'll pick up with that in part 3 next week.
Okay. Lot to consider. Early voting, New York, New Jersey. I'm going to head out and vote today for the first time early. If the line,
I heard you said on the radio. First time, huh? Me too. We're going to be first timers. What are you expecting, Prof?
I don't know. I'm about to see. It'll be in a different place too, because I had to research where to go, So I'm going to see how crowded it's going to be. And then if not, then it'll be Monday during the middle of the day. But I'm definitely going to get it in before November, the Tuesday of Election Day. So November 5th. So
Yes,
yep.
yes.
So, New York also, and I think today early voting in Michigan, right? Michigan now through November 3rd. So bank the vote, and every place else in between. Florida, everywhere now in Florida, you can early vote. Let's go. Let's get it.
Let's
I
get it.
appreciate this space, and
I
I
do too.
appreciate you.
Greatly.
Thank you.
Greatly. And Monday night, y'all Nubians, we are we're finishing up social structure, I think, Monday night, because everybody's got the readings. Look over, pay particular attention to John Ma, the chapter 1, I think it is, in Palace. And thank you, Ahmad, and everybody. And thank you, shout out to the folks who donated full digital copies of all 3 of those books. We're just reading a little bit of all 3, but we built a hell of a resource now in narrative. And I don't know John Ma. Mike Gomez I know, of course, and Barry Kemp is an ancestor now, who passed this year shortly before we came to Kemet. But I'm saying authors like Howard French, who's still eternally grateful, authors like Mike Harris, everybody who's been in conversation, John Jennings. I mean, it means something, doesn't it, Prof? You as an author know, and a publisher, what it means for somebody who, particularly academics, people don't read academic books. So say, wait a minute, how many people did what? Y'all read what? I mean, coming close to crying. I never expect, but that's what we're supposed to do.
Right. I mean, when you're reading that article, which I've also put on the air, that college students at elite colleges have not read full books. When you think about what that means 20 years from now, to have folk with degrees from Harvard, Howard, and Morehouse without the tertiary knowledge that is required to critically, plan for the future.
That's right.
We can see into the future, and it doesn't look good. So the work that you're doing, inspiring people to read, whether it's Walter Rodney or Blake or, all of the books that we've read, that most of us have never read, wouldn't even think to read, but we're reading it in community and having you there to do Q&A with, it's invaluable. And we are future proofing. We're making sure that in the future, we'll at least have people who look like us knowing some stuff. Now we need more numbers.
We need more numbers. And man, I don't know a space, Prof, like serious, where people are calling in real time and you get a real sense of community. Even folks now, both chats, as you talking on screen, I'm voting. Somebody said I'm in line as we speak. Like somebody voting right now.
I'm like holding my space. I knew that Trump was going to win in 2016 because of the radio.
Really?
Yeah, all of the polls had Hillary in a landslide, if y'all remember. Yeah. And every day I'm listening to people who were voting for Jill Stein, who were talking about that super predator with Hillary, people not feeling Hillary at all. Of course, she made mistakes. Jim, we can talk about Comey. We can talk about Bill getting off the plane, talking to Loretta Lynch. Stupid. But I knew that the grab him by the pussy thing, just by listening, it wasn't going to bother people enough for them to sit home.
Will the compromise on women's bodily integrity be enough to bring enough white women?
I don't believe there's going to be a November. This election is not about issues and policies.
No, it's not.
So
no, it's not.
If Roe v. Wade was on the table before, which it was,
absolutely,
and more white women voted for him the second time,
absolutely,
with Roe v. Wade on the table. Absolutely. Why do we think something different? This is again a preservation of a time that nostalgia will bear out in people's minds, that people want to return to, but it's also a fear that somehow the largest ethnic group in this country, which waxes and wanes because whiteness is a made up construct, they're losing something.
That's right.
And so
that's right.
They're voting for their lives. Why aren't we?
And he says that Chemerinsky, that's at the heart of this work. He says those numbers are not going to change. The demographics not going to change. This was an iffy proposition to begin with. And see, he doesn't go that far, which is why I said we have to have the Africana Studies framework, because without that, we commingle that with the social structure we're in and we don't get clarity, which is why all the brilliance. In fact, it's interesting. Another iteration. I'm not saying go get it, but I'm just obsessive. This is
you are obsessive. I said,
I have to have all the stuff. This is the latest iteration of the 1619 project. This is the 1619 project of visual experience. And I'm like, how many more of these? Anyway, but the point I'm trying to make is you know, that's why, you know, all of the genius, all of the research, all of the measured tapping into our ways of knowing, our movement and memory, our cultural meaning making, then to drive it into the ditch of, and that is why we have to think of American democracy. But why would you take all of that force and drive? I know why, because last night my Howard my Howard students, law students, wanted to meet, so we went over to Sankofa, and Hiley was there, and so he held court for like 3 hours with these law students who some of them are finishing up. There's some of them in my class right now. Others have graduated. They're still in DC. Some of the most brilliant human beings you're gonna have on the planet, and they are determined to change something. And they sitting here talking with this man who is walking them through decades of trying to change something. And one thing how he said to them, he said, any change has to have a human face. Otherwise, I don't want no part of it. It's got to have a human face. It's got to be for all of us. And he said, I'll say 3 things. The second thing of the 3 he said was, the us that we're working with is us right here. So you got to start with people who are going to be committed to that, and you build and you build, and that's what we see here. What you with Nubia and there, we start. And then the final thing he said was, you should stop talking about revolution, because you can't time or plan a revolution. All you can do is what you can do to effect change. He said revolutions are dictated by movements and larger forces that are beyond our capacity to control. So if you show up, rah, 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 the revolutionary, he said, I don't even want to hear that. He said, to me, that sounds like fascism. Let me tell you about Mussolini and the Italians in Ethiopia. Let me tell you about what happened with the Ethiopian students who I went to school with who became fascists in Ethiopia. Let me tell you about how he started walking them through. Every time somebody come out like, I know and I'm going to impose, he said it always fails because the people want to know, where can I get something to eat? I can't find somebody to close this wound on my hand. I mean, so it was very interesting. Anyway, I want to just bring that.
I mean, it, you know, and I'm not like the 1619 Project or whatever, you know, we've lived long enough to see Columbus re-examined. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, we have lived long enough to see a reversal on Columbus discovering America.
Right.
And a holiday that we all got off of school for turned into something else, right? We've lived long enough to see that. And it happens in moments, which is why, you know, reading The Barn, I'm thinking about Emmett Till. In the opening of that, he talks about the hundreds, maybe thousands of bodies in the Tallahatchie River.
My God.
The miracle of Emmett Till wasn't that he was in that river, because there were so many lynched Black bodies in that river. Black people knew. It's that body came up, that body rose out that river and became kind of a lightning rod for all of the bodies that preceded his body in the river. So like those moments you can't manufacture, you don't know, but we live on this globe together. And for me, the opportunity to dismantle this notion of whiteness, because that's really what's on the ballot, right?
That's right.
Black people voting for whiteness. Y'all really? This is what we do. Like, to really put it in terms of like, what does that mean? It's oppression. You know, it's a system, it's a power construct that will always keep a chasm between those who have and those who have not, and keep you imagining that you could graduate into this thing that you will never graduate into. So, I mean, it's a trick, right? Like you said, that operation that we're playing to not hit the edges, but it's right in front of you, right? And it's very simple. And everybody else who's talking anything differently than that is an agent of chaos. You can argue with yourself. I will leave every conversation and block everybody who is trying to do something other than get us very clear and very free. So, I mean, that's the mission here. Not many will travel that either. So I'm very clear also that narrow is the road that leads to salvation. Few will travel it. It won't be everybody. And that's okay too. I just want to be on the road with people who are going in the same direction. So we continue, one foot in front of the other, Dr. Carr.
That's right. Very Octavia Butlerish. That's right.
All right. I'll see you on Wednesday on Urban View Mornings. On Monday, I'll see you in office hours. The rest of the Nubians will see tomorrow. I just had Dr. Amin on the show, on my radio show, but I think it's Dr. Narissa's this week. But we are constantly doing things. And Dr. Beatty had his 100th show.
100th show.
Not a show. It's not a show.
No.
100th class. Meta Nature is completely different. It's not a show.
It's complete. Yeah.
And I reached out to him about his book. And
excellent.
also imagining, like, I grew up on Edith Hamilton and, studying Latin and Greek and, in high school, and loving mythology and all of the Zeus and the, Iliad and the Odyssey and all
Of
that.
course.
But I know that there's something that predates it. And the thing that awakened my imagination to mythology, I know that there's a comedic, and there has to be. So, I've tasked him with helping to develop that for the next generation, because we have to throw ourselves into the future with intent. So
Excellent.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole tradition of that. And cats that wrote comics and did that work. And yeah. And so he's, I mean, yeah, that is, there's no, that phenomenon, that meta nature course, which is an organic course. I mean, like I said, it's not, he's building that, and everybody was building it in session by session. 100, imagine that. 100 sessions.
I said, please, can you pause so we can go back? Because I fell off, and I want to go
I mean,
back.
but that's why everything's recorded, right?
I know, but there's a sense that you're so far away from the origin of it. Yes, we can go back to one and keep going, but now y'all are going ahead, and I kind of want us to
Oh,
pause
I hear
a
what you're
little
saying.
bit.
Well,
Pause a little bit
it's
so we can catch up.
it's funny you said that, because I've been thinking about this a lot. For quite some time, but to again, for the millionth time, I was scribbling something down this week, and I thought, here we are in 242 of weekly conversation, and that which isn't comprehensive, but is encyclopedic enough to give a real feel for our conversations. The compendium, the kind of, it's not even an archive, a searchable document that has been generated, 1,500 pages plus and counting, living document. And that would be like, if it were a book, that would be the end notes. And the end notes is a fraction of the book. So I thought, each one, I've been thinking about that a lot, because, and we talked with Paul about this quite some time ago, the possibility of, each week, if it were five per volume, that would be a lot of volumes of books, because and this would, and see, my hesitancy is because this is we jailbroke the university. I think about our colleagues, our friends, those who would teach at universities, and they think about, they spend a lot of time writing these books. They spend a lot of time writing articles. And for me, as useful as all of that work is for thinking about things, at the end of the day, it also serves in some ways, I don't want to say as a vanity project.
I was
But,
say it, because most
well, I don't want to
hold on, most professors, because I was on a tenure track until I realized that I've published 30, because you have to get published.
right.
But they never consider my published works to be scholarly.
Right.
So, but like 2 people bought your book. I got books that have, sold tens of thousands. A lot of books. I've, got 8 New York Times bestsellers in my arsenal, but that is not valuable because it's not academic, even though it's a work of journalism, especially the nonfiction. So I realized in that moment, as I sit in these meetings with these academics talking about the blah, 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 and what they publish that nobody reads, why are you publishing things if it's not with intent to actually educate and get massive numbers of people to read so they can be educated? That's not the goal of it. So academia is effed up. I'm just going to say it with my full chest. So if we publish, it should be with a purpose. And the purpose should be 100 years from now, somebody's going to pick up this book, and here's what we need them to know. Right. And here's what the direction is. And here's sort of like a time capsule of what happened here, if it's nonfiction. And if it's fiction, let's awaken the imagination.
I agree. And that's what we have to do. This is what Woodson aspired to and did. Du Bois too, differently. The language changed. And yeah, we just had to find that sweet spot, because somebody sent me a video, a young man taking some folk through a museum in West Africa.
I saw that.
You saw that, and he
commented on it. I was like, okay, let me look at this.
Oh yeah. You saw it. He asked the lady her name. My name's Miriam. He said, well, I can't tell where you're from. That means the Muslims colonized you. He said, he asked the brother his name. So I said, Yoruba name. You from Yoruba land? And this is my name. My name doesn't make anything either. And then he gave his other name. She said, are you from Yoruba land? He said, yeah. He said, the Black Americans, they can't do that. And I thought about that. Carr is the name of someone who had my people captive. And so The reason I hold on to that name is because it is the name of the people that had my father's people captive. The reason that Hayes, my mother's name before she was married, I don't say maiden because again, I reject all of those formations, was that because they were captive in Alabama. And so I think about that as those names mean nothing to me except that they connect me to people in my blood lineage and family and community. And I say all that to say that when we say, which you remember at the beginning, even now it's hard for me to say it when you say it in class and you say, oh, in class with Carr. And I was like, yeah, but when you see me, you see all of us. And so even the idea then of printing conversations, to me now, the challenge of, and it's a welcome challenge of editing has to retain. And now think about things like Michel Foucault at the Collège de France or Frederick Jameson, Mimesis Expression and Construction. This is his, I've been reading this. This is a transcript and a edited volume. No, and you come on back and say, this is 700, I mean, not 700. Yeah, 775 pages of a seminar, one seminar. This is Frederick Jameson's seminar on aesthetic theory. And so you see, this is a transcript of the conversation. And I'm saying this would be maybe, I don't know, 5 or 6 in classes. And I'm saying the academics would say this, oh, this is very useful. And I'm saying there is a purpose for those who want to do deeper study.
This part I got. And somebody had the mitigated gall, the audacity to ask a question whether or not you've read Project 2020, all 900 pages. And I'm like, just because you don't have the capacity to read.
Who are they asking?
Please, they were in YouTube, of course.
You know, you borrow my copy. Here it is.
No, they were like, he didn't read 900 pages. And
Me?
like, yeah, I was like, please
tell them to ask a question. They can ask a question right now in real time. I'm not mad. In fact, that should be what happens. I don't think anybody, in fact, I think Mike read all 922. Have I read all 922 pages? Absolutely not. Not yet. So I would say probably about 75% I have. In fact, Ms. Anelli, she's got a radio show on Monday where when we were talking about 2020 Project 2025. But if you want to talk about it, I don't need to finish the other 25% because I absolutely have read in all the chapters, some of them completely, most of them around 75 to 80%. But let me be very clear about that. People who haven't read any of it shouldn't be talking about it. I mean, to me, if you're gonna hold yourself out as a mediator, you should talk about anybody. That's my thing.
The other wild thing is people tend to judge people based on what their capacity is.
Or what their socialization is, because they have the capacity to do a lot more. I'm not mad at questions like that. I welcome that because it should be. If somebody holding themselves out,
it wasn't a question; it was a declaration, which I also have a problem with. No,
well, I mean,
you could prove it. But anyway, I love you. I love you
too.
immensely. I love everybody else here. And Nubians, you know, we'll see you. You know what to do.
You know what to do. You know what to do. Yes. All right. Oh yeah, you know what to do. You know who used to say that? Benjamin T. Kirk. Benjamin T. Kirk, when Tennessee State would come up to play our theme, TSU Funk, he'd say 1, 2. You know what to do. And then it would play, right? So I'm just saying that to say that shout out to the people where I work and love, Howard University students, faculty, man. And shout out to my alma mater, Tennessee State University, who beat that booty like it deserved last week. And I couldn't lose, but it was quite a thing to sit there with the with Howard University that took over part of Howard's 100th homecoming and welcomed Howard University to their own homecoming with a little taste of that Southern life. So anyway, I'm gonna stop. That's all. I love.
Okay. I love both the band wasn't there, but the band played on.
Glad because the aristocrats are marching now between 250 and 300, and it wasn't. They had no place to sit. But next year in Nashville, we're gonna show that Southern hospitality, that Southern African hospitality. Come on down, get this next booty whipping, and then enjoy the aristocratic bands. And shout out to the Showtime Marching Band from Howard that did a great job. Dougie Fresh was there and Freeway from Philadelphia. I'm like, so is this for us? Because I know it ain't for the kids. You got Dougie out here. The band did a great job. Howard, give scholarships to band because Showtime Marching Band is now marching over 100. They could easily be 3 times that size. They could be toe-to-toe with Tennessee State or Grambling or Florida A&M. Put some value on them young people's names. Those are my students, and I know very well the challenges they face. So while y'all out here cloud chasing Michael Jordan with his brand all over everything, slide some bucks over there and let the band director have enough band scholarships to put that and do it before next fall, because you don't want to take 100 people to Nashville. That's it's not gonna be cool. Anyway, so anyway, love you. Love y'all.
All right. Love y'all. See y'all next week.